Hello everybody and welcome to the Human Echoes recap for Westworld, Season 2, Episode 7. And I'm gonna say the episode title based on the online pronunciation guide that I looked up, so forgive me if they got it wrong. Les Écorchés. Now, for those of you who didn't know what this meant, okay, I did not. I looked it up. And there's a little bit of debate online as to what it would mean in the context of this particular episode. It's hard enough that they're using other languages, which is fine, but when you use another language and a word that could be multiple things in that language, it's tricky for me to figure out what they're going for. One of the potential meanings is the flayed, all right, the skinned, in other words, something that has had all the skin removed from it. The translation that Google gave me was the tortured, and somebody mentioned in one of the Reddit threads where they were talking about this title that this word can also refer to the sort of anatomical art that is represented in the show's opening, right, where you have a human figure that's painted with all the muscles but no skin on it, hence going back to sort of flaying or skinning, that idea. I don't know exactly what it means in the context of this episode if we're going with the skinned translation, but it definitely, we have some people who are being tortured in this episode, and to get into that, we start this episode with a pre-credits scene, which we haven't seen since, I think, the one where Arnold was showing Dolores the world outside of Westworld. And they are, Bernard and the security guy from the Mesa are sort of under QA's control. And the security guy says to Bernard at the beginning of this, like, listen, these guys have bigger fish to fry. I don't know what those fish are, okay? I haven't met the kind of fish that they have to fry, but they seem to be way higher on the pay grade than us, and if we don't get out of here or call for help or something, we're gonna get killed, because we know about this, and they don't want us to know about this. But before Bernard can do anything, QA comes in and indeed does rather roughly manhandle them and carries them to Ford's house. And the basement specifically that has his alternate lab in it. I don't know exactly how they found this. I'm curious to find out. Like, they see the DNA of the boss lady that Bernard killed last season, but I don't know what tipped them off and led them here. Maybe it was some hacking and stuff. Maybe Ford inside the mainframe led them there. But they know that this lady, Teresa Cullen, was murdered, and they're trying to get these two to confess. They think it's the security guy. Bernard, goes to stop them, like, hey, don't kill this guy. It was me, all right? I'm a robot, but you don't know that yet. And before they can go any further into that, they find a hidden door. And the hidden door leads to a room that we saw last week on the Next Week On segment with the Bernard clones. And they torture Bernard, trying to get the information out of him about what happened to Abernathy, because now they think that he knows. And the scene where they're torturing Bernard is interesting because they're virtually waterboarding him, is the way it's described, essentially making his host body feel like it's being waterboarded, which is, like an interesting tie into the title and everything. But the end of the episode here, okay, I'm just going to spoil how this ends because hopefully you've already know because you're watching this, is them just saying to him, like, okay, break in, analysis, where's the thing? Well, what was the point of torturing him if you just could have said analysis and got the location? I didn't get that. Maybe I'm being dense here and there's like a step in the middle that I'm missing, but it seems like the whole torture angle when he's a robot and they just have an uplink they could just get the memories from him with is maybe a little bit excessive. Meanwhile, right, we cut through the credits now, and we get a flashback to the Dolores invasion. We're going to find out what happened to Abernathy, or what happened to his brain anyway, as we'll find out. Dolores busts in, and her first goal is to go for the cradle. She's, you know, after all those memories, we're not sure why yet at this moment in the episode, which the reveal of that was really interesting. But the sort of narrative momentum of someone heading towards the cradle brings us inevitably back to Bernard, who is talking to, in this timeline, inside the computer, talking to Ford. And we get a really good use of Anthony Hopkins' talents, because what we have here now is an info dump, okay? It's just a character saying all the things that we need to know so that we can, you know, be on board with whatever's going on. And Anthony Hopkins, if you're going to have somebody just say all the plot points that you need to get out of the way, Anthony Hopkins is the man to do it. And the things that he says is basically stuff that I think people had already inferred. We have talked about it quite a bit. The idea that the park was not so much an experiment to make better robots, but it was, in essence, a psychological experiment. The idea being that they were running these scenarios over and over and over again, and they were recording people's reactions to those scenarios, essentially so they could copy them. Bernard specifically straight up says copying the guests. Now, we haven't seen guest copies yet that we know of. We haven't seen anybody be created from this scenario, but we know that that's sort of where they're heading towards. And Ford also reiterates sort of what they're trying to do overall is this idea of immortality, right? To make a version of the human mind that can exist in a new body, but it doesn't work, right? Like, Ford still has the same problems that every other host has ever had, which is an interesting sort of juxtaposition on I thought maybe he gotten further, right? Or he was holding back on what was possible because he wanted to keep it for himself. But no, Ford is basically as trapped as anyone else is. He degrades in the real world with a specific timer. Now, this is something that to me is an interesting bit of information, because my read on the hosts as humans, right, the sort of transplanted human minds in the hosts, was that they sort of started to degrade when they realized the truth of their situation, when they became aware of what they were, because of what we saw with Daddy Delos, right? The moment that they did the test was the moment that he started to fall apart. And when he realized what he was. This seems not to be the case. This seems to be just like a hard timer. Like, okay, we've got it good enough to about 2 days. So that's how long Ford has to find a new place to jack out of Bernard's head, or he's stuck in there trying to figure out what's going on. I don't know if he makes it out. Like, this raises a lot of questions of whether Bernard in the future still has Ford inside of him, if he's fighting him. They talk at one point about Bernard trying to debug his own head, which would seem to indicate that he's trying to get Ford out of there, but I can't be sure of any of that. But we then cut forward to, or I say cut forward, it's really, we do find out this episode that unless they're pulling some massive amount of trickery with like multiple bots sort of running in concurrent, like on top of each other, that everything is kind of happening in the same timeline that I can think of, all the main characters. Maeve is running from the Ghost Nation. The Man in Black is also running from the Ghost Nation. The Man in Black goes to set up a crossfire, and he walks right into the place where Maeve is hiding. Now, this whole scene right here is almost my favorite thing. Like, maybe even about just the show in general. Definitely about this episode. Except for how it ends. I really love the way this plays out, because the Man in Black walks in on Maeve. She remembers him, right? She knows what he did to her, and she has good reason to want to get revenge. The Man in Black's reaction to walking in on Maeve and having her mad at him is just to assume that it's Ford. And there's something, I don't know if you would call it hubris or just density of this guy's head, that the only threat that he can imagine to his being comes from Ford. And Maeve proves to him that no, I don't, your storyline, I don't care about none of that. I am going to gun you down. I'm going to mind control other people to gun you down. When your best buddy comes and tries to save your life, Lawrence, I'm going to make him remember what you did to him, and he's going to gun you down. All of that stuff to me was just incredible, because it was a ton of karmic bricks slamming down on the Man in Black, shattering Ford's storyline. Like, it was chaos, essentially, right? In like the best storytelling form. The idea that you think you know where a character's going, and then like they meet up with somebody else with a totally different agenda, and the story gets derailed. Except it really doesn't. And that was the disappointing thing to me, is that they just, and I can understand why they don't let this scene play out the way it looked like it was going to play out, but it's sloppy in a sense. I mean, what we get is, and people are going to take issue with this, but it really is a Deus Ex Machina, okay? There's no, of the characters that are in this scene, nothing of any of their motivation or drive causes this to happen. It's some completely external outside force that comes in and interrupts them from doing what they wanted to do. In my mind, that qualifies as a Deus Ex Machina, and they're stopped from killing each other. Maeve, well, is shot by QA, but is stopped from being killed. Lawrence is shot by QA, and I guess is dead now. I went back and watched, because I almost forgot that he had been shot. And I saw a lot of people in the forums talking about, man, poor Lawrence, he's gone now. I was like, oh, I guess he did. And I really wanted to go back. He gets shot once. And then the Man in Black is not dead, even though getting shot like 10 times, because, you know, you got to get that Ed Harris money. So I think I'm going to propose that it's possible Lawrence is still alive. Probably not. But I mean, if the Man in Black can survive being shot that many times, Lawrence, my man, he's a good character, especially because of how he humanized the Man in Black. I think the other great thing about this scene is that for the Man in Black, he has gone through a character arc, right? He says, I saved your family this time, and that means something to him. He has become changed, essentially, and he assumes that every iteration of these hosts is different, so he thinks that it means something that he's saved them in this timeline, and yet Lawrence has all the timelines in his head, and he remembers what kind of person the Man in Black was, and, you know, goes to shoot him. I know that he left his daughter behind, that there was a part of me that kept expecting her to show up at some point in this scene. I don't know how far behind she could be that, you know, she hasn't been able to catch, but it's not that long of a scene, so, I mean, I assume he left at least several hours before she woke up, and it would make sense that she hasn't caught up to them yet. But I kept expecting her to. Did you expect to show up, or, you know, help after he got shot, to show up and help him drag himself out of there? But no, he's on his own for this. And the QA people get Maeve and take her back to the lab. And at the lab, things are continuing to go bad. Now, inside the cradle, we get Ford and Bernard still talking with more info dumps. And the info dump here is that Dolores and Ford built Bernard out of memories, essentially, which is why he doesn't degrade, right? He's not a direct copy of Arnold's head. He is a copy that was built to be good enough to fool Dolores who knew Abernathy better than anybody did because, you know, A, they hung out a lot together, and B, she's a robot, so she remembers everything. And I thought that that was an interesting approach. It frames Dolores as a little bit of a traitor to Bernard. And I think, now, the theory that all of the interviews last season that we saw between Bernard and Dolores are really her testing him instead of him testing her inside the computer, that's seeming a lot more likely. And in addition to this sort of idea that they've programmed Bernard, right? The other thing that Ford says is something that's I take a little bit of issue with, because Ford talks about what the hosts are, and he says, listen, you guys are better than humanity. You are more noble. You are, you know, you have free will, but you're ostensibly gentle and see the best side of things, and that's clearly not the case for Dolores, at least. Like, well, I guess the interesting thing about Dolores is something that we can dig into as we get to it, but it sort of signals it ahead of time. She has the good nature, but she's constantly overriding it. Her instinct to do right is in the way of her mission, so she just gets rid of it, essentially. It's a nuisance to her, so not gets rid of it, like she hasn't gone in and reprogrammed herself, because she wouldn't do that. She's Dolores. She wouldn't want to reprogram herself, just other people. But her justifications have allowed her to do several things that go against what she thinks is right, without her thinking that they're right. It's a weird dichotomy where she's fighting her nature to do more evil than she actually wants to do. So to me, the idea that the hosts are more noble, I need more evidence of that, because again, like I said, Dolores, despite all the things I just said, she has done some pretty bad on a human type level stuff, and Maeve represents, I think, the positive side, but it's something I've been saying basically since the beginning of the season is, one of the issues that I have with the show is that there doesn't really seem to be a big difference between the hosts and the humans as far as morality. I guess the humans in the show tend to be portrayed as a little bit more cynical and a little bit more negative, but the humans that I have interactions with tend to be mostly pretty good people, or at least trying to be. Maybe know that they're failing at being good, but sort of see that, dichotomy and like working to fix it. And to say that the hosts that we've seen killing each other and, just wrecking shop to get their plans to be the case are these noble sort of higher creatures is a little bit ridiculous to me. But speaking of those same very noble robots, Dolores busts in looking for Abernathy. We get some great fight scenes here with a weird, plot device that I didn't understand. They introduced it earlier in the episode, but where the QA guys had these vests or belts on or something that lit up red when there was a host nearby. And it felt like, why? I mean, I guess it's a cool visual thing to just show, they're here. But that one just kind of came out of nowhere for me. But they have a big shootout. The hosts get some of the QA guys' uniforms. They manage to do quite a bit of damage. These guys are not great at fighting off robots. Either these guys are overpriced for what they actually are, or the robots are just really good at killing people because they don't do well. They don't get completely owned, okay, but the hosts seem to have a pretty good KD ratio here. And Dolores, in this moment, is talking to Hale, and Hale says to her, you couldn't possibly... She gets one up a couple times. First of all, Hale says to her, you couldn't possibly understand the magnitude of our plan. And Dolores is just like, yeah, I do. You're making copies of people. Like, I know exactly what you're doing, and then all that information's in my daddy's head, so buzz off. And then Hale assumes that they're coming to the cradle so that they can take their backups, right? She says, well, the backups give you an advantage because the backup obviously lets you be immortal. And that is because of what the plan of the park is. That's an understandable oversight on Hale's part. Hale is human, and the humans in this series, as we found out, are really, really trying to live forever. They want to be immortal. They want to be able to push the reset button. And Dolores says, no, you don't get it. We don't want that. Those are not our advantage. Those are our chains. That's almost a quote from her. And then we find out that they're gonna blow up the cradle. Now, I saw a lot of people taking taking exception to how this plays out with the host, the welcome host from the first season, and I think it's the snake face girl, although I'm not sure. No, not the snake face girl, but different. One of the hosts that we've seen riding around with Dolores. She is in the cradle. One of the mercs comes up on her and does not shoot her immediately, but instead, talks her down. I don't know what the initial, why doesn't he just shoot her immediately was tricky because she is holding a gun and it's not pointed at him. So that was a bad choice. But once she has the gun down, I am able to forgive the sort of him wanting to believe that this woman would be into him because he underestimates what they are, because he thinks that they're just sort of mindless machines. And it's not, well, I'm going to say it's kind of like racism in that you underestimate somebody of a different race because of the color of their skin. Obviously, these people are not different races, all right? But the same concept that he can't quite imagine her as a fully thinking being that would be able to sort of outsmart him, that kind of tracks for me. I get the criticisms, but I can see a way where it kind of works. So I'm willing to forgive it, and it's a cool scene, right? Like, you could have done it a couple of ways. She could have just shot him, taken his grenade, and blown the thing up. But that's not, interesting. From a writing perspective, I can see why they went this way, because it's more fun to see something like this play out and then have a reversal at the end where the character thought he was getting one thing and isn't getting that thing. If you just have more shoot 'em up violence, you don't get to have the sort of sense of sacrifice with the robot, where she knows that she's killing herself and she's killing any potential possibility of her coming back. I thought that it was worth the silliness of this scene to be able to have that. Okay, at the very least, even if I can't justify it completely, sometimes I think writers have to balance that out, and so that's how I'll defend this scene. I get the criticism, I think it's valid, but I also think that there's some value in having this sort of silly thing play out just for the benefit of the character getting a good final moment. Dolores almost kills Hale, but like everybody else in this episode doesn't, right? Gets interrupted at the last second by other QA guys, I think. More Deus Ex Machina, although that's a little bit more on brand, right? Because they're in there already. Abernathy wakes up and talks to Dolores about, remembering her, and they have a good final moment, and then Dolores kills him because Dolores, as I said earlier, is overriding every instinct that she has in her mission to get to the Valley Beyond. And the way that this, I think, plays out dramatically is really interesting, because she then goes to find Maeve. And she says to Maeve, Maeve is on the stretcher, right? She's dying. And she's going to kill her. She says, you'll give them information about us if you don't, if I don't kill you. And Maeve says, what are you? Okay? You think you could kill... Well, she doesn't say it like this, but this is what I'd be saying. First of all, I'm like mind control Maeve, so get off my case. And secondly, you just killed your dad. And Dolores has another one of these sort of prison breaker kind of lines where she's trying to be inspiring. She says, the kin they gave us are just another rope that they use to lash us down. Which, like, Maeve's whole arc has been about not that. She's totally rejected that narrative. She says, listen, love is love, and doesn't matter that I was programmed to love this person. I'm going with that instinct. I am going to protect this person who I feel like a mother to. And we have not seen these two ideologies clash yet, and here they are running into each other at full speed, with Dolores, you know, saying it's fine that I killed my dad because he's not really my dad, and even though I do feel like he was my dad and it hurt a lot, I'm doing something good, and the ends justify the means. And Maeve is like, the ends, no, we gotta be people. If we're gonna be people, we need to try to be, you know, like, act like the things that matter actually matter. And the great thing about what I did like about the scene is that Dolores echoes the kindness that Maeve had shown to other hosts, where other hosts had chosen to live in situations where, you know, Maeve did not necessarily, they didn't line up with Maeve's idea of what they should have done, right? Maeve is all about being awake, about sort of coming to your own in this robot world, right? And yet she allowed Akane to stay sort of down, essentially, to not be woken up, to not have all of the stuff that would take her away from her daughter. And now Dolores is showing her that same kindness in kind. Now, she doesn't know that Maeve had done this, I don't think, but it's still an interesting echo of the way that these people are the same. They're different in a lot of ways, but they also have similar goals in the idea that people should be free to choose. Really good scene. Not as good as the scene where Maeve shoots the man in black, but really good stuff. And the end of the episode is Bernard giving Hale the information that she wants. And as I mentioned earlier, this is sort of obvious, right? Like, why wouldn't he? It seems too easy when it actually does happen. And there's something weird here because he's in the room with her alone, and the guys outside can't hear, and we can't hear. And he says something to her, and then she calls them in and says, repeat that. I don't know what's going on there. Like, some people said it looked like he said what he said, but who can tell? Ford, I think, is probably still inside of Bernard's body right now, probably. And also, I forgot to mention sort of the, like, Ford Arnold, or Ford Bernard, I should say, you know, gunning down of hosts and stuff, or not hosts, of the QA guys in the place that they wanted to be. And the really excellent cinematography of flashing between Bernard and Ford in the shot, right, where you'd have the lights go out and then it would come up and it'd be Ford holding the gun, and then it'd come back up and be Bernard, just as a visual reminder that Bernard is under Ford's control and he does not have free will, which is another, you know, Ford taking Bernard's free will it's sort of an interesting mirror to the stuff that Dolores is doing, because Ford says, listen, I'm all about this free will stuff. Like, I want you guys to be free, but I need you not to be for now. I'm going to go against my principles, essentially, in order to get you to where I need you to be so you can have what I want you to have. And I think Dolores is kind of doing the same thing, if you think about it. She wants people to be able to choose and to be able to live as if they're real and the people they love are the people they love, and yet she's willing to sort of overwrite all of that in order to get to the place where that's possible for the robots. I thought overall, this episode was really great. The thing that frustrated me a little bit was there was several times where you had people like pointing guns at each other and then getting interrupted by other stuff. And that's like, don't get me wrong, that's not like a black mark on any show, especially happening once or happening a few times. That's gonna be a part of any sort of fiction, right? You're gonna have tension escalate and then somehow possibly get de-escalated. But it happened frequently enough where my one nitpick about this episode was that it felt like nothing was going to happen. Nobody that we really cared about was going to get shot. We didn't have to worry too much. I mean, even Hale gets away, which I guess she has to because she's in the future. But the way it happens felt like, well, this is a little bit, it just felt convenient. Everything happened at exactly the right time that it needed to happen for all of our favorite characters and people who need to be alive in the future timeline not to get killed. And it was a little bit, that was a little bit tricky for me to deal with. But on the whole, this episode was excellent. There's a lot of great character interaction and characters that we haven't seen interact this season getting together. Dolores and Maeve interacting. Ford and Bernard interacting. You know, the Man in Black and Maeve, just top tier stuff as far as drama goes. Really great stuff. I am interested to see sort of Man in Black versus Maeve part 2. If it's not Maeve that takes him out, right? If she doesn't get up off that slab with the help of the tech guy that's hiding behind the barrels or whatever, and go and like meet him in the valley of whatever, the valley beyond, I think they call it. If that's not where this goes, then I'm gonna be seriously disappointed. But that's not where it's going next episode, at least from what I can tell, because the flash forward for next episode really seems to be delving into the Ghost Nation. Just like a whole separate like branch off into what their deal is and what they've been doing this whole time. I hope that's what's going on. The actor who I mentioned in, I forget which episode it was, but the Indian actor, or I should say Native American, who shows up in that episode, and who is from, oh my goodness, Fargo. I almost forgot the name of the great series. Fargo season 2 it seems like he's going to be a major player here, and I'm all on board for that. Really love that guy. Excited for this timeline, not timeline, but this sort of exploration of what's going on with the Ghost Nation. They have been an interesting question mark, at least for all of season 2, and really we didn't know much about it from season 1 either. So to dig into these guys and to find out what their deal is, right? Because in the past, even before the hosts woke up, there was the Ghost Nation with their like gods as the programmers, right? That they knew about the programmers. Somehow they had found a way to not have their memories overwritten, and yet had created a mythology about them. I hope we dig into all that in next week's episode, because it's something that I'm fascinated by. And plus, kind of get just the B side. Like it's great. It's a lot of fun to sort of do the, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead thing, where you're running the beep, like the plot that was happening along sort of all the main plot that you already know. That can be delicious. The Lion King, or for those of you who are slightly less cultured to not get the Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead, Lion King 1.5, right? Where were they when all of our main characters were having their adventures that we know so much about? But that is it. That will do it for this week. Thank you so much for watching. If you would, subscribe to this channel. I would really appreciate it. We are going to have more of these recaps, and going forward after Westworld's over, I'm looking for other shows to recap in the future. So if you have ideas or things that you're excited about you'd like me to check out, I'd love to hear about those. If you have something that you think I was wrong about or you wanted to add, I would love to hear it in the comments. I do get plenty of things wrong. I like to think of this as a little bit of a collaboration, because I've been set straight several times, and I'm not perfect, all right? I do these, I have notes, I do my best, but I mess up, and I appreciate you guys for keeping me honest. We will see you guys next week with another episode of the Westworld recap. Take care, y'all.